Hello, everyone. I am Samuel Fekadu, and I made a skit about tropical birds and their bioenergetics in a comic format. This skit is called Professor McCaw's Lesson on Tropical Parrot Bioenergetics. The setting is in Peru since macaws are one of the symbols of the Amazon rainforest, and the topics and traits I covered in my skit were parrot growth and development, origin, evolution, survival, predator and prey, metabolism, and metabolism in parrots in different regions, and thermogenesis. These topics are seen on the introduction page with supporting images, which you can see right here. It shows the parrots saying hello to each other, the professor and the students, and then the images that support the topics that I will be going over. The first page is about growth and development, and it starts off with one of the students asking the professor how long it takes the parrots to grow up. You can see that right here. And then the rest of the page goes around the stages of adolescence that happen in parrots, with the first one being the neonate or the hatchling stage, which is when the parrot is first a newborn. And while they're in that stage, they don't possess any hearing or sight and little to no movement, making them very dependable on their parents and vulnerable to predators. The next stage of adolescence is fledging, which is on this slide right here. Fledging is when the parent starts to fly and see for the first time, but they're still protected by their families and they're still dependent on them for food. After fledging, there's wheeling, which is when the parrot is able to feed themselves for the first time. You can see that on the third slot. And they don't have to be bird fed about by their parents like they were in their earlier stages. And the last stage of parrot adolescence is the juvenile stage. The juvenile stage is when parrots are becoming comfortable and self-dependent when it comes to their basic needs of survival. The only difference between them and adulthood is their overall size, and they can't reproduce until they're fully matured. The fully, the entire process of parrot growth takes up to 40 days for them to grow to mirror their parents and the way they look. And their full maturity takes about 1 to 4 years, depending on the species and the climate, for them to reproduce and start the cycle over again. The second page is about the origin and evolution of parrots. And it starts with one of the students asking how long the parrots have been around. And the professor tells them the history of the parrots on how the first fossils of parrots were found over 50 million years ago in Eocene Europe, and how they evolved from theropods, which were carnivore dinosaurs. The professor parrot tells them about scientific findings in an article named Parrot Genomes and the Evolution of Height and Longevity and Cognition by Morgan Whifflin et al., which goes over some geonormal and evolution advantages that parrots have compared to other birds. He tells the students that the parrots have larger brains compared to their body size and how their complex brains gives them the ability to talk. Parrots also have genes that help them live longer. Those genes help repair damaged DNA, aid with cancer, immunity, and antioxidative mechanisms. These genes help birds have longer lifespans compared to other birds, showing how parrots often live longer than other birds because they have these genes that help them survive. Parrot evolution is similar to human evolution with the way our brains are and how it explains how humans and parrots can communicate with one another, with parrots being able to talk. The third page is focused on parrot survival and predator and prey. It starts off with the students asking who their predators are, and the professor tells them that their main predators are hawks, eagles, owls, snakes, jaguars, ocelots, and other bigger animals that live in their environments that can reach the parrots, with their prey being Fruits, seeds, nuts, and insects, with them not being that big, their prey are really little compared to what they can have compared to their predators. So with them being lower on the animal kingdom scale. After explaining predators and prey to the students, Professor McCall talks about another article named Temporal Factors and Distance to Human Settlements Affecting Nest Survival of Endangered Yellow-Headed Parrots in Belize, Central America by Leonardo G.A. et al., which goes over the survival of parrots in the region of Belize. These problems can apply to any parrot, though. From 2017 to 2018, there were 6 monitor studies that studied the nest survival of yellow-headed parrots and what was causing them to perish so frequently. The main causes have to do with predators, parent abandonment, and poaching. Prior research showed that it was conducted to calculate the survival rate of yellow-headed parrots, which ended up being only 18%. And you can see how the students reacted to that. The results of this study showed that the main causes of the perishing yellow birds were because of their predators, their parental abandonment, and how poaching led to the main cause of death. They had to deal with a lot of predators, which were mainly reptiles and other birds, advising students to stick to their families for their protection. So the professor was just letting them know that they were still younger and how they should still stick with their families before going out on their own as parents. And they agreed. The next page is about parrot metabolism, which starts with the student asking the professor about how parrots being endothermic and what it means. The professor gives a definition of endothermic animals that was written by Dr. Sharice Winston, which says that endothermic animals are all animals whose body temperature depends on heat production from their metabolism, making endothermic animals warm-blooded. After that explanation, the professor explains metabolic rate and basic metabolic rate, simplifying it as regular metabolic rate being consumption and basal metabolic rate being the rest. Letting the students know that their bodies are at work at all times, the professor goes over one last scientific text with his class, and it being called Basal Metabolism in Tropical Birds, Latitude, Altitude, and the Pace of Life by Leonardo G.A., which goes over the effect of altitude and latitude on tropical parrots. The professor says that scientists claim that tropical parrots have low metabolism and low metabolic rates because their environment, they live in a low latitude and warm environment, which is very suitable for their survival and their comfortability. They tested this experiment with measuring the metabolic rates of over parrots in 253 different species in different latitudes between 2 to 6 kilometers in Peru and Panama, which is the setting of this story being in Peru, and with the parrots coming from both Peru and Panama for this. Testing the altitude and temperature implications of the parrots, they discovered that although parrots in Peru and Panama live in different levels of latitude and altitude, it doesn't affect their metabolism in most cases. The students were confused and asked who was affected by altitude and latitude since it wasn't affecting normal parrots. The professor goes and tells them that the only parrots affected were mother birds and breeding mother birds. And he tells them, so before all of you were born, your mother's metabolism differed in this circumstance. The typical parrot BMR is dependent on the temperature unless there's reproduction. Luckily for them, they live in a warm place so they don't have to worry about extreme thermogenesis. And the parrots asked the professor one more question before his final topic, and that being, what is thermogenesis? Then on the last page, the professor goes over thermogenesis. The professor says thermogenesis is how an animal's body regulates heat. As parrots, they don't have they don't have sweat glands, so they have non-shivering thermogenesis. So they have to expend heat from another way. Birds use their throats and their mouths to release heat or find a more suitable place for their comfort for their thermal regulation since they can't sweat and expend energy in that way. As you can see in this picture, it gives a pretty good detail about how that process would go. But after thermogenesis and thermal regulation, the the parrots say goodbye to the professor and the study was over. I hope all of you learned something and you like the graphics from this comic I made. If there were any questions, you can email me at sfekadu@sandiego.edu. I appreciate this. Thank you, and have a good break.